I want to welcome both Cheri DiNovo and Mike Smith to this conversation around conversion therapy. For those that do not know, Cheri is the minister of Trinity St. Paul's in downtown Toronto and was previously an MPP for Parkdale High Park in Toronto downtown as well. And Mike is a queer activist in the city of Toronto and works in HIV/AIDS related health. So thank you both so much for being with us today. We're going to begin with both Cheri and Mike sharing a little bit about their experiences around conversion therapy, both from a political and a personal standpoint. So Cheri, would you like to begin?
Sure. So first of all, the picture behind me, if people are seeing that, is the very first Toronto Gay Pride. That's me with dark hair next to my girlfriend at the time. Just so you know what's behind me. Certainly. So I was in politics for 12 years and introduced a number of queer bills, and all of them got passed ultimately. And turns out that's the most queer legislation that anybody's managed to get passed in Canadian history. So I'm proud of that, including trans rights. And so obviously conversion therapy came out of that work. It was something that I brought with me as a queer person into politics, wanted to get a number of issues done, from trans rights to parent equality and adopting children. And this was just an undone effort. So it needed to be done. Part of the spark for it came from the trans community, a wonderful group in Sudbury called TG Intercell. So shout outs to that group in Sudbury, who, when I asked them, what more can we do for the trans community? They said two things. They said banning conversion therapy, which was not even in the air at the time. Really, not very many people knew what was going on. And a Trans Day of Remembrance. So that was my last bill, actually, a Trans Day of Remembrance, which the government now acknowledges every year. So with conversion therapy, the first I knew it was happening in Ontario, this is how naive I was about that issue, was when we traveled with the Gay Straight Alliance bill as a committee. And we had coming before our committee psychiatrists, doctors, people in the medical profession whose entire practice was conversion therapy, and they were proud of it. I was shocked and horrified. Obviously, these folk had, well, I suppose it's not obvious, but it was in fact the case, had a religious bent, mostly quote unquote Christian, although I don't consider them thus. But we were shocked on the committee that this was happening. That this was happening across Ontario then, you know, in the 21st century, and horrified by it. I mean, I knew that church groups had the Pray the Gay Away stuff happening, but I didn't realize that it was ingrained in our medical system, and in fact, in some of our biggest hospitals and medical institutions. So one of them we couldn't even name for fear of being sued when I introduced the bill for the first time. We had a number of survivors, Mike, like yourself, come forward, a number of trans survivors in particular. One who told a story of being told at the age of 15 that she was way too masculine looking to ever be able to convert, by a team of people in white coats in our major, I'll just say this, our major mental health institution in Toronto. You know, Jeff, you asked, you know, where did the resistance come from? It came from many areas. It didn't just come from the Christian right. It came also, although it was from them, of course, but it came from some in the medical community, and one in particular whose name I still won't mention because he's incredibly litigious and hired a public relations firm to defend him and was suing people right, left, and center. But one particular doctor, a quote, psychiatrist who worked at this institution, came and was badgering members of the committee when we looked at this bill. Certainly I have to give a shout out to my liberal friends across the aisle at that point, who really defended the bill as well and allowed me to get it done. I had to fight with a lot of people in all of our parties, including my own, to get this done. Not so much around the disagreement, around protocol, and just getting it, just getting it through the loopholes quickly enough. Andrea Houston, I want to give her a shout out. She was my EA at the time, and she was a columnist for Extra before her political involvement. She was really seminal in getting the news out to the press in a way that we could get this done quickly. We got the bill done in literally a few weeks from second reading to passage, which is almost unheard of, right? So that's my history with it. I still have history with it. I'm still doing, I mean, I was at the federal government. I know Rob Oliphant. I was there when they introduced the bill and was part of the press conference for it. So have been supportive of it since the beginning. I don't see it as a partisan effort. I see it as a human rights move. And so I think across partisan lines and across our church and across our communities, the way to really speak about it is that one, it's a human rights issue, and two, it will save lives. I can't say that loudly enough. It will save children's lives. It's that simple. Queer kids are at the highest threat of suicide, still are, by the way, despite everything, still the highest rate of suicide among queer kids. And it has been shown through numerous studies now that the conversion therapy movement, if I can call it that picked up steam in the 20th century, has been responsible for suicide. There's no question about it. People in churches who have maybe heard about this happening in churches, for example, movements like Exodus and others that came out, should know that the leaders of Exodus came out, completely repudiated their former lives and their former actions. And that was the biggest of those church-based organizations. So anyway, I'm blathering on, but just to give you a little bit of history and context to this issue, I even find it difficult nowadays to find evangelicals of a certain age, like not older evangelicals, but younger evangelicals who will defend it. I mean, they still think homosexuality is sin. I don't know how they could figure the two in their brains, but I mean, they have a, kind of choke on the term conversion therapy now. So just to let people know out there that it has widespread support among Canadians, this bill, of all religious persuasions, and that in the crafting of the federal bill, there was widespread consultation too among religious. So, so just to let people know that, yeah.
Thank you, Cheri. That was great. Mike.
Okay, thank you for that, Cheri. My history with this is quite different, and it's definitely more personal, as I am a survivor of this thing that we're talking about today. I participated in probably 4 separate programs over a span of more along the lines of 2 or 3 years, condensed. But as a former member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, this is something that I kind of lived with for most of my life. And so my approach to working with different communities around conversion therapy is helping them understand why this is bad, and what it is that makes it so bad. And I think we need to spend a lot of time talking about these things specifically, because I don't think it's always clear what's going on. Conversion therapy has many different faces. When we talk about it, we often think of electroshock therapy or aversion therapy. Those things happened a lot more in the 20th century. I can't really speak on how prevalent they were moving into the 2000s. But the more subtle things that I can kind of explain about as I explain some of the programs that I went through. So I became involved with conversion therapy when I was preparing for my mission as a Mormon missionary. Growing up in the Mormon church, I knew that something wasn't going quite well. And I needed to talk to someone about it because before you become a missionary, you make what is called your endowments in the Mormon Church, where it's seen as an extra commitment to your devotion to God. But if you like break these covenants or these commitments, it's quite serious. And so this was stressing me out. I needed to figure out what was going on. And essentially, I believe that it could be a thing that we could change, because I didn't know what the science was. I didn't know what was going on outside of my like Mormon bubble, even though I grew up in Ontario. So I went to LDS Family Services, which is located in Etobicoke. I met with a psychologist, and this psychologist did a very brief psychological assessment, but immediately jumped into, well, let's start developing your faith. I have my records from those interventions, and on one of those interventions, his case notes included for treatment was a scripture from the Book of Mormon, and that's it. And it's a scripture about faith and building your faith, which is good. You know, faith is good to have, but is faith a solution to something you can't change? I didn't know that at the time, so I just went along with it. It's like, great, I know how to build my faith. I'm going to read my scriptures more often. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to fast. I'm going to serve people. We got this. We know how to do this. I went on my mission. I thought that was going to be okay. Struggled through that, but that's a different story for another day. Coming home, I had the expectation that things were going to start moving. So I met with a psychiatrist, a Mormon psychiatrist, and he started talking to me about different options that I had. And he was the one who was kind of breaking it down for me, giving me options like taking certain psychiatric medications that would essentially make me asexual. So that was an option that was given to me. And then a lot of different other therapies, which would kind of make me cope with the idea that I could be in a heterosexual relationship and like function. I don't know what that means, but I kind of like followed along with it because I believed, and it was taught to me, that the only way that I could be happy and the only way that I could really find my place and be successful in this world was to get married to a woman, have a bunch of babies, and make a lot of money so they can be happy too. My life was set for me, and if I didn't follow that, then everything was going to go downhill. And so I did what I needed to do. I was later introduced to a program called Evergreen International, also through LDS Family Services. This program no longer exists, but it was not affiliated, but connected closely to the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City. And this program, if I can elaborate more, started teaching you that you are broken, that you didn't develop properly, and that because there was like an error in your development, you can fix it somehow. And so what happened was I did a couple exercises where I had to pinpoint where my dad went wrong in raising me. So we went through some questions like, was your dad close to you? Was he not close to you? And through this process, I just blamed my dad for everything. I did something very similar to my mother, blamed her for everything. And that's what this church adjacent organization was teaching me to do. And it caused a lot of division in my family, and I left it aside. That one didn't work for me, but I went to another one because, you know what? I'm going to find the one that works. This one was in the United States. It's called the program Journey into Manhood. I don't think it's called that anymore. But this is another program that teaches you're not wired properly, but we can rewire you if you go through our program. And the thing that really affected me with this program was that it seemed so legitimate. It seemed so scientific. They were introducing things like psychodramatic therapies, where essentially you would relive some of the trauma that determined that you would be wired incorrectly, and that would make you attracted to the same sex. So fortunately for me, I didn't really experience a lot of trauma in my life. I was fortunate in that matter, but I witnessed people relive some terrorizing things. I'm going to share one of them. The counselor laid down on the floor. Someone draped a sheet over top of him, and one of my fellow conversion therapy participants was encouraged to talk to this body covered with a sheet as his dead father. Talk to your dead father. What do you have to say to him? What do you think he has to say to you? Let's relive that. Why? Why? Why did that have to happen? Oh, I didn't think I was going to cry today. The last program I guess I could say I was part of was life coaching through someone named Alan Downing, who was based out of New Jersey. And I worked with him for about 3 months until I realized that this wasn't working anymore. And that's when I realized that I needed to start looking at a different path. 10 years later, here I am. I went through the experiences of suicide ideation, mental illness, substance abuse, troubles with relationships, troubles with my family, the whole shebang. It definitely affected me. I spent a lot of money on therapy. And where I am now, after that, sorry, that long-winded narrative, is I can say that I can work on this now. It's taken me that long because it's been so much unlearning for me. And I have a degree in social sciences. I've been working in the LGBTQ sector for almost 6 years now. And I'm still unlearning the things that were ingrained into me through those systems. So yes, I think it's very important that we're doing these things on the political side of things. But it is my belief that if we want to see change in Canada, that we have to work with communities and individuals and people of faith to help them unlearn as well. And I'm going to stop there because I know we have other things to talk about. I apologize.
Yeah. But if I might just respond to Mike. First of all, I mean, it's heartbreaking hearing your story, and so lots of love and light. And I absolutely agree. I mean, changing the law is just the first step. And I wanted to make it very clear, because sometimes it's not clear in the discussions around the federal bill, that conversion therapy is banned in Ontario, and my bill was made law in 2015. And what that means is that psychologists and that psychiatrists were breaking the law if they were to practice and do those things today. The federal bill will criminalize the practice, which extends it even beyond that. But it is already illegal. So you're already, if you're in Ontario, covered. And it's really important to let especially minors know, or young people know this, so that they can at least question if something like that happens to them, because it's not always clear. But what happened to you is horrendous. It is absolutely not faithful. It's profoundly unchristian, and you're so right. The law is just the first step, because the damage that has been done to, generations, let's put it that way. I mean, the damage that's been done to generations is horrific. And I'll stop there and throw it back to Jeff. But suffice to say that always, there's a legal change, and then there's the slow consciousness raising work that happens in communities that makes it so, right?
Mike, if you'd like to add something, please do.
I just want to say that my parents are incredible. They're active members of the Mormon faith, and they've been through this whole journey with me. Learning as we go.
And there's some movement in the Mormon Church. I happen to know this for a fact, right? I mean, not enough, but I mean, there's been some movement.
But what I want to say is, my parents saw what was going on the whole time, and I was talking to them what was going on. But then when I asked my dad if he really understood what happened to me, he can't. He doesn't know. And that's what has taken me back a little bit as well. like a lot of what I do in my professional work is like capacity building, community development. And if I was to see this, I'd be like, okay, we gotta, you know, put some learning objectives down. We gotta break this into like components. Of course, we're not gonna do that with every Canadian, but like we do need to break this stuff down to like take it out of the high level, to bring it down to a more personal thing, like keep sharing stories, keep sharing different narratives, different perspectives, so people get it, that this is terror, that this bleeps you up significantly, or people don't survive this. And that's the bottom line. I'll leave it there. Keep going. That's great. Let's keep going.
Thank you both. Yes, something I want to sort of go off of something that was a very similar thread there with both of you. And that is around faith-based organizations and their involvement in this in particular. And I would also sort of say somewhere, and maybe Cheri, you can all, please do correct me if you think I'm wrong, but there is a way in which the United Church has almost ignored it. This isn't our problem. And in a way, ignorance is almost part of the engagement in it. I realize saying that as an employee is maybe not a great thing, but I do think that's somewhere we have ignored it, to be honest. Like, yeah.
Well, not just conversion therapy. I mean, yes, and I think it is really important. I mean, I think it's very United Church of us to be critical of the United Church. We should be self-critical, right? But I mean, I did the first legalized same-sex marriage in Canada in 2001 before the law changed, and the government at that time of Ontario threatened to take away my license. They wrote me a letter from Thunder Bay. It was a legal letter saying, we're going to take away your license. I was in a congregational setting at that time. And I appealed to our Toronto conference at that time. I heard nothing. I appealed again. I heard nothing. And so I got, you know, I did what I say all good Christians should do. I called the CBC and got a lawyer, you know. So I got a great lawyer, Doug Elliott, who'd been fighting marriage equality in the courts, and CBC blew it up, and then the Toronto Star carried the story. But I never did hear from the United Church. I mean, had it been up to the United Church, I would have lost my license. So, I mean, there's one case, and there are many cases of, you know, LGBTQ people being fired in the United Church. There's never been an apology for that, you know, before 88, and 88 was when I walked into the church because of 88. But I mean, you know, again, this is a history which I believe we do need to address in some way. And I think it's important to be self-critical. And conversion therapy, I mean, it's still, you know, I still hear from parents, you know, of kids who are coming out saying, well, we're like, it's kind of, instead of celebrating it, it's like, oh, really? Oh, like even well-meaning liberal parents, progressives, you know, saying, oh, okay, you know, do you need, like, it's like, this is kind of, oh, well, too bad, you know, we still love you, but too bad kind of message in you know, omission or commission. And I think that's the work on the ground that has to keep on keeping on. Yeah, and especially now with gender fluid kids and trans kids that are coming up, there's incredible prejudice and incredible hatred and incredible danger to those children. So, yeah.
I think ignoring is easy, of course. And again, my perspectives are from the Mormon faith, which is, let's not go there. For the Mormon faith to acknowledge what's going on, I think they would have to be accountable for what they've done, and they're not willing to do that. And like Cheri, you say that the Mormon Church is doing all these good things, but
well, no, don't get me wrong, not all these good things, but I did pick up that there were some changes. Isn't it like I'm so out of the pop world, but is Imagine Dragons or something? There's a group that are Mormons where he's made I saw the film, you know, talking about the work he's doing, trying to affect the church. But again, baby steps, right? Baby steps.
and I see it as face value, and I see it as a PR stunt. And I'm going to say that publicly.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
You know,
Good to know. Yeah, thank you.
because at the end of the day, these people are not welcomed to participate fully. And what I mean by fully is, in the Mormon Church, you're either all in or you're all out. You don't have choices. We don't have space for critical thinking. That's known as apostasy. So I'm so happy to be working with a faith community that can be critical. Ah, bless. But it's like, it's just like, and historical context as well. Conversion therapy, like in my interpretation of the history of it, was like Christianity's grasp at holding on to like this faith system that said a man and a woman were the only two genders, and they were the ones who had to create families to perpetuate our faith systems. And so it's kind of like, we need this in order to perpetuate the system to keep this faith, these faith communities alive. And they kind of did what they needed to keep that going. The Mormon faith was very involved in creating these pseudoscientific interventions that were not good at all, destructive. And I just feel like contemporary conversion therapy just continues to grab at science as much as they can, but it doesn't go anywhere. And it's harmful, and they're just trying to grasp onto the system that doesn't reflect human experience anymore. Like, sorry, it just doesn't.
Yeah. And it's important to note it's not just the Mormon faith that does that. I mean, you know, huge swaths of faith communities are still not necessarily practicing conversion therapy the way you experienced it, like, but certainly think that being queer is a sin. I mean, and even though you can, you know, like sort of pray for the sinner and separate them from the sin kind of theology, I mean, it's still out there and it's still everywhere. And I went to an evangelical church. Well, I'll mention their names. You're talking about the Mormons, but C3 in Toronto, huge evangelical youth-based church. Hundreds of kids show up to that church every Sunday morning. They have three outlets. I was going to say, but three plants, church plants, and you know, it's great worship. It's band playing. I was listening to this sermon, nothing too objectionable. I'm thinking, oh, okay, so this is kind of interesting, even though it's evangelical. So I sent a note off to the minister, and I said, so where are you on LGBTQ issues? Like, are you inclusive or not, basically? Never heard back. And then one of our congregants, who was a journalist, interviewed him and asked him the same question flat out. And he said, the classic red flag, he said, well, you know, we're all sinners. And I thought, okay, you're not inclusive. Thank you for sharing. So and these are kids, those churches are filled with 20-somethings, teens, early 30s. It's very hip, it's very cool. It's, you know, it's not old school Christianity, and it's still the same old repressive, exclusive theology. So putting it out there, just in case there are any queer kids listening that have wandered into those places, because it's still there, and it's not just older people, and it's not just older faiths, right?
If I can tie like this conversation into the bill and some of the comments that O'Toole has made, like from what I gathered from the different articles and his statements, I think like he's defending the folks who are scared to acknowledge that they're harming their kids.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what he's doing. Absolutely what he's doing. And by the way, he's an Ontario politician whose father, John O'Toole, sat next to me in the legislature and saw when my bill passed. Not all Tories voted for it. Don't want to give you just enough to get it passed. But I mean, he's also lived in an Ontario that for 5 years has banned it. And so guess what? Chicken Little, the sky has not fallen in. And guess what? There's still all sorts of different religions doing all sorts of different things. It hasn't affected their ability to do what they do one iota. So it's very disingenuous, that line of reasoning. And he's just playing, as you're so right, Mike, he's just playing to the right wing, and he's playing to the worst of people in faith communities. And it's, I think it has to be named, it's dangerous. He is putting young lives at risk. End of story.
End of story.
Yeah.
If you don't provide the care that your trans children need, you could be responsible for the harm and the death of them. I'm going to say that.
Yeah.
If you
absolutely
refuse that care for them, that's on you, or that's partially on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't feel bad about saying that. I've worked many years in crisis centers and community health centers where that's been a lot of the people's situations. That they have no support, they have no care, they have no resources, and they don't want to live anymore.
Yeah.
That's reality.
Yeah, and I don't think, and it's a good message to just hammer home, because I don't think a lot of people get how life and death this issue is. I don't think they get how life and death inclusion is of LGBTQ2+ people. I don't think they get that. That's also life and death. And conversion therapy is life and death. It's part of that, part of the struggle for human rights, right? This is life and death. And it's life and death predominantly for our children. And again, that message just, that you can't make it loud enough. For parents who are wondering what their role is, and who are caught in systems of thought that are not inclusive and are not open, they have to know that it's their children's health that they're playing with.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely, and thank you for saying that. And this is why, like, my parents only want the best for me, and they've only wanted the best for me from the beginning, but they only know what they know. And so, like, it's up to us to continue talking about these things in different settings, because, you know, I professionally, like, I grew up in an activism, grassroots environment, but if I didn't have my Mormon background, I would not know how to do this, not know how to approach these people who don't get it, because they think that trans and non-binary experiences don't exist. These are temptations from the devil. These are, like I was describing before, like abnormalities. These are sicknesses that can be cured, and we're only just recovering from that system of belief. And so a lot of learning that needs to happen. Hugely.
Yeah, and yes, and that's why these kinds of forums are so important.
Yep.
Really important.
This work needs to be done. This work, our government needs to establish that this is what we are standing for. This is what we believe in as Canadians. And that this is how we're going to care for each other as citizens.
And I have to say, on the positive side, I've officiated at so many weddings now of non-binary, of same-sex, of right across the spectrum, and where their parents were there, where their parents did not originally, accept them or worried about them, and they're rejoicing with them at their wedding. And it was a conversion experience for their parents, talking about conversion experiences. It was a conversion experience for their parents, and the overwhelming message that their parents, who had to travel a long way emotionally and spiritually to be at that place to celebrate their children's wedding. And the overwhelming expression was, I'm so glad that I'm here and that I didn't lose them, that we didn't lose each other, and that we're all still alive, I mean, yeah. So yeah, you want to dance at your children's wedding, no matter who your child is, right?
Yeah. I wish my mom could be here, because devout Mormon, lovely person, she would say that. She would say that. Mm-hmm.
This is so great. I could listen to you both talk to each other all day long, to be honest. I just sort of have one sort of final follow-up question. As it was highlighted, there is 5 proposes within the criminal code law around this legislation related to conversion therapy. And as I read these, which include causing a minor to undergo conversion therapy, removing a minor from Canada to undergo conversion therapy abroad, causing a person to undergo conversion therapy against their will, profiting from providing conversion therapy, and advertising an offer to provide conversion therapy. I think a lot about the way in which faith communities engage with LGBT Q2S plus kids. And I wonder how we can engage members of the United Church of Canada in the conversation at a larger level, at both the federal level, but also in their own communities and in their own sort of context. How do we get United Church people that sometimes get a reputation of being very nice, and I'm just going to use the word nice, actually, as the representative, to get them engaged, to see that trans kids' lives matter, gay, lesbian, bisexual kids' lives matter, and that this is about saving life.
Well, the first thing is forums like this. So thank you, Jeff, for organizing this. I mean, I think this is so important to get the word out. In terms of the practicality of that federal bill before us right now, the best thing to do is to call your MP, literally phone them up, and don't just write them a letter, but phone them up, be the squeaky wheel, keep after them until, you know, and try to educate them if they're not on the right side of this issue. So that's something, and we're very good, or have been, and you heard Mike talking about activism. I mean, we tend to be good about things like that in the United Church and getting active around issues. So that would be that. And then don't be silent. Don't be silent. You know, there's, you know, how many times has everybody that you've known, and like, I'm old as dirt, but I mean, how many times have you been in rooms where there's some stupid crack, or you hear something that's, you know, homophobic or trans or biphobic, or, you know, you know, how many times has this happened and silence is the response? Do not be silent. Do not be silent. You never know who's in that room. And this, when I was a politician, I remember going out to a school, you know, you talk to 15-year-olds in their civics classes. And so I went out, and this is downtown Toronto. This is 21st century. Went out to a school, said, what do you want to talk about to the kids? And I, you know, no prescribed agenda. And one of the kids, these are 15-year-olds, put their hands up and said, we want to talk about how the new sex ed curriculum says it's okay to be homosexual. And this is a public school in downtown Toronto. And so all of a sudden I found myself with the Christian kids in the classroom and the Muslim kids in the classroom talking about chapter and verse and faith, because it was coming from their parents, right? And I was very conscious of the queer kids in the classroom with their heads down, and my silent prayer for them was just get through here alive. And this was a school with Gay Straight Alliance posters from TDSB up on the walls and everything else. So guess what? It's everywhere. It's in our midst. These attitudes, do not be silent in the midst of it. And I know, Mike, you do this for a living. I mean, I feel like I do too, in part. We all do in part. But you know, this is true for our congregants. It should be true for our congregants too. In whatever setting they find themselves, wherever their workplace is, whatever they're doing, do not be silent, and do not shrink from the discussion. Enter into it, and the same politically. So, yeah.
Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
Of course.
Okay.
I'm just gonna share some of the things that pops into my head as you were sharing that, Cheri. In my work, some of the challenges are working with different populations, generations who grew up, you know, after like post-Vietnam War, generations that grew up in the 80s and 90s, and then generations today who are growing up today. Significantly different. And the way that we would approach them in community health settings are very, very different as well. And I think as we're cooperating together and as we are trying to teach each other, some key messages that I would like to share. Queer and trans people are not dangerous. We might be loud. I'm very loud. But because we believe in what we're doing, and we've experienced some really hard things, and we've seen other people see really hard things, and we're passionate, and we believe what we're doing is right. So we may be disruptive, but we are not dangerous. You don't need to fear what it would be like to include us, because it's okay to be different. In some generations, especially my parents' generations, being different was the worst thing that could happen to you. And I remember some of the first things my dad said to me when I came out was, what's gonna happen to you? Who is gonna hurt you? And those dangers still exist today. We have to acknowledge that. But it's not what it's like today as it used to be in Canada. We can have happy lives. We just need the space and the acknowledgement and the rights to live happily and in peace. We don't have a gay agenda. We just want the same rights as you do, and we're not far left liberals. Well, some of us who are trying to steal things from you. No, we're working towards the same things that you treasure in your heart and in your family. And if that humanizes us a little bit, then great, because we are human, and there's nothing wrong with us. And we just need to keep those things in mind as we work together and as we try to understand each other's perspectives.
Absolutely, and we are everywhere.
We are everywhere.
We are everywhere. So, when you're having conversations in a room with people, one of us might be there. So remember that. One of us might be within earshot, and because, anyway, yeah. But you're right about the generations by and large, but I just have to say that, it's still very much there, and not in the way it was when I was growing up, although we were really out and proud even back then. Like, maybe we were like in your face, but but we were, yeah, a loud and noisy minority. But I have to say, I was the only woman that signed on in 1971 to the first gay rights demo at Parliament Hill. It was all men. I couldn't make it, but I was the only woman that signed on, and every single thing. And we thought we were just total utopians. Like the demands that we made, there were about 30. I can't remember how many. We just thought it was completely utopian, right? And every single one of those demands and more than that, we have attained in my lifetime. So times change. You can achieve it. There was this wonderful thing in 1968 in France where they said, be realistic, only demand the impossible. So be realistic, only demand the impossible. And honestly, the impossible, for the most part, came true in my lifetime. And now on the ground, we're trying to make it real in individual lives, right? So, yeah, I mean, I have nothing but utopian visions ahead for everyone, including getting this bill passed. I'm sure we will. I know it will happen. It's just will happen. But it doesn't mean that some 16-year-old is sitting in some classroom and still experiencing it, right? So we're also cognizant of that, both ends.
Absolutely, and we should acknowledge that we are three white people who experience a lot of privilege, who have completely different experiences than most of a lot of Canadians. Those differences are different, and we need to acknowledge them and take more time to learn about them and continue to pass these laws that acknowledge and create more space for them as well.
Right, absolutely.
Great. Thank you both so much for this and for taking the time to share with everyone both your experiences, but also the work that you have committed to in this life, and for being beacons in this world for people that are sitting in that room, terrified. I know I was one of those young people sitting in a room in a small rural community, terrified when a teacher told us, oh, we don't have to talk about AIDS because only gay people get that and they die anyway. And I still hold on to that, as that experience as a young person. So thank you both for everything that you've done.